metaphysics, isn't it? Do you want to kick off?
Yeah, just a few words. Thanks everyone for coming. This is our second meeting of the Oxford Society of Metaphysics. We are very happy to have Father Andrew Pinsent with us. I will say just a few words about him. So he's a Catholic priest of the Diocese of Arundel and Brighton, and is research director of the Jan Ramsey Centre for Science and Religion at the Faculty of Theology and Religion, Oxford. Formerly a particle physicist at the Delphi experiment at CERN, he has a doctorate in physics, degrees in philosophy and theology, and a second doctorate in philosophy. A major theme of his research is second-person relatedness in science, philosophy, and theology. His publications include work in virtue ethics, neurotheology, science and religion, the philosophy of the person, and science, divine action, and the nature of evil. At Oxford, he has been principal investigator for more than 7 million of research grants for projects involving scholars in more than 40 countries. He is a regular contributor to public engagement with science and faith issues. So now I'm turning you over to Professor Pinsent, who will speak for about 40 minutes, and after we will have 20 minutes of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Giuseppe. Let me just walk into the line of sight of the camera. Hello, camera. Hello, world. So Giuseppe invited me, and you're starting this society, is that correct?
Yes.
And you've had your second meeting, so well done. I'm a great believer in students of all ages getting together and talking about philosophy. I think university should be a garden, not a machine. And Oxford approaches that ideal more than most places. What do you think I mean if I say Oxford should be a garden, not a machine? I'm being very prescriptive here, but what do you think I mean? How is a garden different from a machine?
One's an artifact, a machine's an artifact.
That's true, but you're redefining the problem without solving it, I'm sorry to say. So can we try to go a bit deeper? You're right, but let's try and go a bit deeper. How is a garden different? What's it like to be in a garden?
It's not anywhere near as prescriptive. A machine has criteria of success and failure.
That's true, yes, that's interesting. One thing about a machine is that machines are normally built by individuals. Who runs Oxford? That's a general question. Who runs Oxford?
Well, if it's a machine, then the Vice Chancellor.
That's a machine.
If it's not a machine, then it's us.
Maybe there is, but one thing is, I've been here for 18 years on and off, and I still don't know how Oxford works. And people ask me how, they expect me to know, how does Oxford work? I say, I don't know. And you see, there's a work of genius here. It's really a set of interlocking medieval guilds. There are faculties, there are colleges. That's ridiculous. There are all kinds of associations. Why? Why is that a good thing, do you think? As opposed to a bonkers system.
Intellectual community doesn't scale well in my experience.
Okay, so keeping things so small is beautiful, perhaps. That is something people have thought. Any other advantages of all these different communities? Any other advantages?
I guess what can be done on a lower level ought to be done on one, so sort of.
Okay, you're trying to anticipate me, which is great. Well done, sir. Yes, I'm trying to get towards the idea of as a principle of European law, but not used much by Europe, of devolving down to the lowest level. That's true, but why is that a good thing? In your personal experience, before I launch into my own personal experience.
Prioritises individual freedom of thought.
Yes, that's true. It's not just freedom from, but also freedom to. And what good things result from mixing you up into societies and faculties and colleges?
You're free to end up at dinner sat between a theologian and an astrophysicist.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's true. I was saying to someone earlier today, going to lunch, I said, I'm not sure what I'm going to sit next to an Air Vice Marshal, an expert on medieval law, a quantum physicist, an expert in conflict resolution in Africa, a virologist. It could be any of those things. And in fact, I sat next to a Jewish man, and we talked about Catholic-Jewish relations, which was very interesting. I didn't expect that. Did anyone plan that? We didn't. The Vice-Chancellor didn't. It's a spontaneous result of Oxford being a garden, not a machine. And the other thing is, as a particular advantage of Oxford, is that there are weird things in the margins. The powers of evil can't destroy it very easily. Yeah, there are powers of evil. People who want to kind of make society into a single machine, a single bureaucratic machine. And that spirit is very strong in some of our top universities of the world. But it's harder to get traction here because they don't know how the place works. And we are forced to keep going into situations of serendipity or providence. And often ideas are sparked off by these informal conversations. I remember many years ago, hello, greetings, welcome. Welcome, sir. Now I have to explain, we didn't exclude women. But apparently, talking about metaphysics has attracted a certain clientele. So, welcome, gentlemen. Could you just, those of you who just walked in, could you say what you do? Yeah,
I do classics.
Classics, very good. Yes.
I do chemistry.
Get another scientist, thank you.
Theology and religion.
Theology and religion, it's my own field. Great. So, welcome, everyone. We're just talking about the nature of Oxford, and I was explaining that it's a garden, not a machine. And so I welcome people who set up metaphysics societies, long may they flourish, because even if you only meet a few times, something could happen that could change your lives, could change the world. And I still remember casual conversations when I was an undergraduate here. I was an undergraduate in physics, and then I was a graduate in particle physics. And I remember boasting, sorry, I was young, you can count it. I remember boasting to someone in the senior common room. I said I was working on the largest machine in the world. Anyone know what I was talking about? What is the largest scientific machine in the world?
The picture.
Sorry?
The Large Hadron Collider.
The Large Hadron Collider. Well, there was a machine before the Large Hadron Collider called the Large Electron Positron Collider. It was built in the same tunnel, so it hasn't got bigger. But I remember saying to someone in the senior common room of Merton College, I was working on the largest machine in the world. Greetings, sir. Just before you sit down or find a seat, can you tell me what you do here at Oxford?
Actually, yes, I'm a medic actually.
You're a medic?
Yes.
Welcome, sir. We have some other medics here, a medic from Italy. And welcome. There's a seat over here if you want to sit down. Anyway, I was saying to someone in the senior common room of Merton College, I said I was working on the largest machine in the world. And this person responded to me, well, what about the Trans-Siberian Railway? Isn't that a bigger machine? So I thought, oh gosh. And then I had to think, what is the nature of a machine? How do you find the limits of a machine? But that was quite a philosophical question. I remember my physics professor at Merton College, who was almost a caricature of the physicist. This man ate, drank, worked physics all day long. And he used to say, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. Now I would challenge him today, but it's not so easy when you're 18. But that was another philosophical statement. Okay, so there's philosophy and conversation at Oxford, quite a lot of it. And you may just have conversations which, in the Society of Metaphysics or in college, or just casually, because Oxford forces us all to mix all the time. You may find all kinds of philosophical ideas come out of that, and I do encourage you to engage in them. Now, you've asked me to talk about the role of metaphysics. Does anyone know what metaphysics is? Or would anyone like to take on the challenge of forging a definition? Don't worry if you don't, but I don't want to deprive you of the opportunity.
Because when I say something like the study of what you have to assume in order to talk out of things.
Could you say that a bit more slowly?
The study of what you have to assume in order to talk out of things.
Okay, so on that account, metaphysics is like kind of the first, and you have to what you have to assume in order to know about other things. I think that's partly right. I think it's also partly wrong, but it's a good start. Thank you. Anyone else like to go? Okay.
The study of the transcendentals.
The transcendentals. Okay, that's an interesting. I wish you had some markers we could write this up. Transcendentals. What does transcendental mean?
A thing whose properties cannot be reduced to any one type of being.
Oh, that's nice. You've done this before. Oh dear. Okay, it's fading out. The transcendental, or the conditions of the possibility of doing other things, or possibility of maybe being. Greetings, those who just arrived. I have to explain, we didn't exclude women, but it's just, it has attracted, the talk's attracted only the male sex. So, anyway, welcome. I'm talking about what is metaphysics. If you want to throw something into the ring, please do. If not, I will carry on. What is metaphysics? You can ask me to talk about metaphysics. You must think it's worthwhile. Yes?
The study of reality beyond the material world.
Oh, beyond the material world, okay.
Or outside of it.
So you would disagree with my physics professor?
With what?
The physics professor I talked about just now said to me when I was 19,
Yes.
if you measure it, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist.
I don't necessarily.
Okay, you would disagree with me, which is great. so beyond matter. It's not very good. Anyway, never mind. So, anyone know where the phrase comes from, metaphysics? Practices probably ought to know this. Yes?
Aristotle?
It does, yes. Anyone know so the origin of the phrase actually is ta meta ta physica, which roughly means what is after physics. Why is this phrase important? Why is after physics important? And what does the word physics mean in this case? Yes?
Nature versus.
Nature, well, very good, thank you. Physis, yes. Yes, when Aristotle talks about physics, he's really talking about philosophical biology. It's not modern physics. And have any of you ever heard of a documentary called Aristotle's Lagoon? No, none of you. Well, I'm going to add some value to your knowledge, because you'll find it free on YouTube. It was made by BBC4. Someone's uploaded it to YouTube. I was checking earlier this afternoon, so I can confirm that. But Aristotle's Lagoon, anyone know why that was significant in what Aristotle did in his lagoon? Yes?
Investigate like different species of animals.
Yes, he invented, actually he did more than just investigate, he actually really invented biology. This man invented biology. Now most biologists today don't study him at all, and the documentary Aristotle's Lagoon is about a modern biologist at Imperial College who accidentally, almost, gets a copy of Aristotle on the story of animals, or the history of animals. And he's amazed. He said, why have I never studied this before? Why has no one told me about this before? Now, of course, a lot of it is out of date, in the sense that biology has moved far on from that. But he laid the foundations. So you talk about investigating species. Well, he talks about genera and species. He looks at how animals are related together. How's that problem? We have one more chair, and that's perfect. Full house. Next. So Aristotle invented biology, and his philosophy is very much inspired by biology. And I come back to what Oxford is like, because Oxford, I said, is like a garden, not a machine. That's very significant, because here we cultivate ideas. Here we cultivate insights. And much as the bureaucracy would like to control it, they can't. Or at least if they did, they'd kill it. Our society is very good at killing the things it wants. The thing is that when you meet people here, when you meet people in different societies, when you're forced to converse at lunch with an expert on law, or an expert on quantum mechanics, or someone who's following the football, whatever, you're forced to keep switching to different subjects, thinking about ideas, making relations. And that often triggers ideas, because when you bring different fields together, often there's an insight. I was reading a book recently called Social Physics, and it was early on. There's a man at MIT who's in the hard sciences, the hard probably physics, I think. And he says when he's stuck, he goes out and just talks to someone, almost anyone. Talk to me about your field, archaeology or biology or something. But he gets ideas by doing what we do here quite naturally, which is mix across disciplines. Okay, so let's go back to this issue of what is philosophy. Oh, it's very interesting ideas. Transcendental, yes, maybe. Conditional possibility of being, yes, maybe. Beyond matter, what is beyond the material? Do ideas exist? Anyone want to make a bet on that? Yes or no? Who would like to say yes? Most people think yes, okay. Anyone like to say no? Few, okay. So ideas don't exist. But one thing is, it's not an easy question, because you could be material about it in two different ways. One of which you could say, well, you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. All right. Ideas don't exist. Because ideas do exist, but they're related to material reality. So there's a kind of second order materialism, which is quite popular today. Physicalism. So I'm throwing out these things like physicalism, materialism. These are ways of picturing the world, and they are types of metaphysical accounts of the world. Okay, so let's go back to this issue of what is metaphysics. It actually started, some people say almost accidentally, tar meta tar physica, that which comes after physics. And Aristotle was writing on the parts of animals, the books of the physics, and then there was some stuff left over, because not all questions are solved by studying particular bits of reality, like turtles or cabbages. Right? There's stuff left over, and some people think it wasn't Aristotle, maybe Andronicus of Rhodes, who said, well, this is metaphysica, but after physics. So there's a deflationary account of physics, which is it's accidental. Of metaphysics, which is that it's accidental. But I don't think that was. I think it was more intentional than that. And there is a book today which you can read, The Metaphysics of Aristotle, and I would say it probably was what Aristotle intended. And he called the subject, the stuff he was talking about, he called it, one phrase first philosophy. So I think when you said earlier, the conditions of possibility of being, yes, maybe it's first philosophy in that sense. Another word for it is wisdom. There is a third word. I'll come back to it at the end. If I forget, please remind me. I have to say if I forget because I've been in the hospital recently and I've had tablets for low blood pressure, which I've discovered makes me forget things. So if I forget to tell you the third word, the third description of metaphysics, please remind me. Anyway, so those are two descriptions. One is first philosophy, and the other is wisdom. So let's look at those two. First philosophy. Now here's a question for you. I'm going to throw out lots of questions. What is the question that all children ask? I said all, almost all. Almost all children ask one question. Yes.
Why?
Why? Have any of you seen this happen with children? In fact, sometimes it gets a real pain. I remember asking my parents questions incessantly. Why? Why? And when I travelled to a Catholic shrine, Lourdes, in the south of France, at the age of 10, we stayed at a French campsite. I remember this little boy running around and saying, pourquoi, maman? Pourquoi, pourquoi? I thought they do it in other languages, you know. It's an almost insatiable natural desire. Now, as children grow up, they stop asking why questions, and they ask how, and then how much. Part of the fun of philosophy, by the way, we do everything we can in this university to kill the fun of philosophy. But part of the fun of philosophy is to get back to the why questions. And it's harder to do those things than to ask about the why questions than you might think, unless you're very familiar with doing it. So the English language has a very revealing response word to the word why. So what's the first word of any response to a why question? Why? What's the first word of any response to a why question? Yes?
Because.
Because. Let me write this down. It's so amazing. Because. Have you ever thought about this word? Because you should. Because. What are the two parts of the word? Obviously. Sex? Yes?
Backhand use.
B. And cause. It's not a difficult question. Because. So every time a child asks a why question, the child is asking for the cause of the being of a thing. That's amazing. That ought to shock you, doesn't it? Now, why don't we ask these questions as adults? We should. It's part of being an adult, a philosopher, to ask why questions. So the cause of the being of a thing. Now let me tell you something else about causes. They have a pattern. And so let me ask you another question. What are the material? Let's choose an object. Let's choose a tree. What are the material causes of a tree? Anyone want to guess? What are the material causes of a tree? Just general knowledge, yes.
The particular molecules that make up the tree.
Yes. Would you like to name some of the? Let's go down to the elemental stage.
Elementals: hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen.
Okay, so hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. Very good. There's one big element you're not mentioning.
Carbon.
Carbon. Carbon is the miracle element. Anyone know why I call it the miracle element? Yes.
Well, it makes up basically all of organic chemistry.
Yes, carbon. There's a very famous comment about carbon made by Sir Fred Hoyle. Anyone know what it is? Well, it's related to something he predicted. He said there has to be a particular nuclear energy level at present of the Big Bang for carbon to exist. And he said, this is amazing. And then he said something else. He said, it looks as if some super intellect has monkeyed with the laws of physics. Right? And this was an atheist talking, but that was the shock of carbon. Every carbon atom is amazing. And carbon has a property which is really incredible. It links into infinite chains. Infinite chains. With 4 bonds per atom. And all kinds of complexity can be built out of this. Anyone know a famous molecule built out of carbon? Involved in life, yes.
Not sure.
Oh. Well, it's DNA, for example. Yes, sorry, I interrupted you, sorry. DNA, that's what you're going to say. Excellent. Without these things, we wouldn't exist, materially speaking. Carbon, and you can list other things. There's iron. Iron's the great dustbin of nuclei, because everything is the lowest energy point of all nuclei. Iron, yes, many others. Now, let's say at least 20 others or so, 20 other elements plus. So if you ask what are the material causes of a tree, you've got maybe 20 or 30 key elements. Now what are our elements made of? Let's go to the material causes of elements. So what is each atom made of, roughly speaking? Testing your general knowledge.
Protons, neutrons, electrons.
Okay, right, protons, neutrons, electrons. Oh dear. One day, in one philosopher, may even have pens at work. Oh, protons, neutrons, and electrons. Basically, the different elements are made by combining different numbers of protons and neutrons. And then the electrons come in a sort of shell around them. Now, in moving from this list to this list, what has changed in terms of how they appear? So I'll repeat the question. In moving from this list, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, iron, maybe 20 others, to this list, protons and electrons, how do the lists compare with one another? Yes?
Well, you have sort of loss of categories, epistemically speaking. These various subatomic particles can combine into a great many things that we assume we can listically call different sorts of thing, even though they're all made up of a very tiny number of the purely three different types of things.
Okay, maybe I'll express it slightly more simply. So basically, the number in the list gets smaller. The number in the list gets smaller. So as you move from this list to this list, the number gets smaller. Now, if we were to go up and list all the molecules in all the different trees of the world, you have maybe hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands in that column. So you move from a column with tens of thousands to a column with a few tens to a column with a few, like 3 or 4. Now there's a bit of weird stuff as well. Okay, but never mind. In the 1950s, we had a crisis in particle physics because we discovered other things as well. But anyone know where the new list is? What are the protons and neutrons made of? We think, yes. So there is another list, yes. There's gluons, up quarks, down quarks. But generally speaking, we are happy if the list is small, and we're less happy if the list is large. Now, asking the why question in terms of material causation gets to an ever small number of ever more powerful causes. So really they form a kind of funnel. Okay, let's try another thought experiment. Let's think about what we do each day. So let me give you a few acts. So when I wash, when I eat, when I exercise, what aspect of myself am I looking after? Body. If I study, what aspect of myself am I looking after?
Your mind.
My mind. Now there's an interest, we have a lovely long debate about what the relationship of mind and body. That's another issue. So, if you look at all the actions you do, maybe hundreds or thousands of actions each day, if I check social media, which is getting rather exciting at the moment with Trump, with Elon Musk, what am I looking after?
Not much.
Not much. Good answer. Okay. But let's be generous. When one interacts with others, one is looking after one's society. And most of what we do is look after our bodies, our minds, or our societies. There isn't much that falls outside that category, those categories, I don't think. So here's another question. Let's ask the why question again. Why do we look after our bodies, our minds, and our societies? I'll sit down for a moment while you ponder that. Why do we look after our bodies, our minds, and our societies? You're puzzled.
To flourish.
You're kind of cheating a bit there. Let's keep it more basic.
To live.
Sorry?
To live.
Just to live? A crystal subsists, but doesn't do much.
Well, I guess because we have a natural inclination to do so.
With respect to cheating, we do. That's true.
Live well.
Well, that sounds quite a posh and
Yeah, our bodies and mind help us being independent, and then our society helps us be
okay.
interdependent.
You're all too nice. I'm sorry. I'll tell you something amazing. You will find a lot of metaphysics in your local supermarket. I once found a packet of biscuits offering me snacking nirvana. Seriously. I once found a porridge that it was promised would warm my soul. Not the Costa Coffee advert, I'm serious. I once found a yogurt called Bliss. I once found a cheese called Heaven. What are the advertisers offering us?
Happiness.
Got the word. Can you say it loud again?
Happiness.
Say it big loud.
Happiness.
Happiness. Happiness. It was so important, it was written into one of the most important political documents of all time. Anyone know what that is?
Declaration of Independence.
Declaration of Independence of the United States of America. All men have had to go, or should have liberty to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Sorry, something like that. We have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Because they started Aristotle, right? Aristotle says, when he discusses what is the cause behind the causes of all human action, he suggests that we know the name, even though we puzzle about what it is. And he says it's happiness. And he also says we disagree about what happiness is. He said the hoi polloi, that's the phrase in Greek, but it's in English as well. Hoi polloi, think it's like sensual pleasure, right? The philosophers know that it's to do with the life of the mind, right? So those things we do each day, whether we're looking at our bodies, our societies, our minds, is all to do with the pursuit of happiness, one way or another. Okay, so let's go back to metaphysics. Here's the thing. When we ask why questions, and we keep asking why questions, we get an ever smaller number of ever more powerful causes. And these form a kind of funnel. And we know we're making good progress if we can reduce the number of elements in each list. As you go through columns from left to right, we know we're making progress if we can reduce the number of elements in each list, in each column. Now, could you remind me who studies physics here? What is the state of physics like today? Anyone want to comment on that?
Theories or
The whole mess, please.
Alright, so the standard model seems quite good for particles. Then you have quantum relativity, which don't particularly work. Well, they work, but not together.
Yes.
And then things in the middle pop up and disappear quite often.
Okay, so I have to say, I think physics is in a mess today. Although you're right that the standard model works, it works by putting in a lot of arbitrary constants. And one of them, for example, the ratio of the proton to electron mass. Another one, the mass of the top quark. The coupling constants of the W or Z gauge bosons. It's a bit of a mess at the moment. And what we're not doing is we're not reducing down the number of elements in each column. So physics is a bit stuck. I'm watching some interesting videos by a man called Unzicker, called Real Physics. He's a big critic of the standard model. So yes, it's big, yes.
Could you explain what the standard model is?
What is the standard model? So basically it's the account we have at the moment of all the particles and all the forces that are the material causes of everything. The material causes of everything. So when we talk about, on the right column, up quark, down quark, gluons, now I'd add something else, leptons, which are electrons, the most common example. That's the modern periodic table. You think we've got one chemist here, haven't we? Yes. So, sorry to interrupt you. But in chemistry, you see, one of the great triumphs of chemistry was the periodic table, which was an ordering of material reality. And how many elements are there at the moment?
218, 118, I think?
100, about 118, yes. And there's a laboratory in Moscow which is always trying to push one step further, maybe 119. Hold it together for a millisecond, you know. It's interesting, the definition of existence for modern chemistry, I think, is more than 10 to the minus 14 seconds. so that's the limit. After that, the elements don't have time to form electron shells, you know. So it's an interesting question about what it takes to be taken to exist at that level. So the standard model, yes, so a big thing, and it's a bit of a mess. So we're stuck at the moment in physics. We don't really know where to go next, I have to say, but it'll probably involve building a bigger machine. Okay, so metaphysics. Part of metaphysics, where is metaphysics? Metaphysics is the stuff at the narrow end of the funnel. The stuff at the narrow end of the funnel. This is where physics and philosophy come quite close, because anyone know the old name for physics in this university? Yes?
Natural philosophy.
Natural philosophy. I was amazed. I studied for 3 years by physics, and I got my degree. And I saw I've got a degree in natural philosophy. I didn't know that. Well, good about that. Yeah, we used to call it natural philosophy, the philosophy of nature. Now, it's a somewhat narrow conception of nature. It's, as I mentioned earlier, my professor said, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. But nevertheless, that's what we've been working on in this university. So, one way of thinking about metaphysics is the stuff at the narrow end of the funnel. And it's not just material reality. So when I ask you the question, what causes our action each day? what is the motivation for our action, we got eventually to the answer happiness, the search for happiness. And again, you'll notice that you could perform many actions each day, but they reduce down to one puzzling first cause, which is happiness. So metaphysics, one way of thinking about metaphysics is it's the stuff at the narrow end of the funnel. And all those advertisers mentioned earlier, who they understand at least one philosophical principle, which is that all human beings seek happiness. And that's what they try to sell us. And they exploit the fact we can't define happiness. So they label their product as exotically as possible. Heaven, paradise. You could cut price holiday to paradise. You could, look at the supermarkets, and you'll see lots and lots of metaphysics. Okay, so that's one way of thinking about metaphysics. Another way, let me just remind me when to stop. Another 10 minutes or so?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Another way of thinking about it is in terms of how we grasp truth, particularly how we grasp the stuff at the narrow end of the funnel. Anyone like to hazard a guess at what is truth? Anyone like to offer a working definition of truth? Yes. Yes.
Like a grasp of reality?
Grasp of reality, that's not bad. Yes, anyone know there's a famous Latin definition for the Middle Ages? If you studied here in the 13th century, you would know. Yes?
Doesn't adequatio rate intellectus.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. Adequatio, like a correspondence or a fitting of the understanding, the intellectus, to the thing. And that gives us a definition for speaking the truth as well, whether your words fit the thing or whether they don't fit the thing. So if I say this is a pen, then there's a correspondence, it's true. If I say it's an apple, well, you should say it's false, I think. Now, you might think that this is trivial stuff, but it's not. It's at the centre of a struggle for our civilization. Anyone know which particular area is at stake? You don't have to name it, you don't have to go any further, but just anyone know which particular area of our civilization is very troubled by our words fitting reality? Well, that's fine. Yes. It came up recently in the discussions in America over the selection of a new US Supreme Court justice. Do you know the question? There's a question that she refused to answer. Anyone know what it was? What is a woman? That was a child could answer that question, but this lady could not or would not, because this is an area where adequatio intellectus ad rem is challenged very much. Okay, well, let's not go down that rabbit hole. But it's a reminder that the things we're talking about, or I'm introducing to you, are important issues. They touch on many areas of life today, like the survival of women's sports, for example. Okay, so so one way of thinking about metaphysics, so stuff at the narrow end of the funnel, and truth involves a fittingness of understanding to reality. Now, there are different ways in which the mind grasps truth. That's my last big point. There are different ways in which the mind grasps truth. Anyone know, particularly when you studied Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, anyone know what are some of the intellectual virtues?
Wisdom? Intelligence.
Let's write some of them down. That's wisdom. That's famous. Sophia, yes. Any others?
Intelligence.
Intelligence is not what intelligence.
Prudence.
Prudence, yes.
Craft.
Craft or art, yes, art. Craft, what art? There are two others which you haven't mentioned, which are really important.
Science.
Yes, that's right, it's the Latin word for it, scientia. It's one of the origins of the word science, absolutely. And there's one more. The great forgotten one.
Temperance.
No?
Yes, phronesis.
See?
Phronesis.
No, that's the same as prudence.
Okay.
But good try. Thanks for playing. Any other?
Is it the one that grasps first principles?
That is wisdom.
That's wisdom.
Thank you for playing. There's one more. And it was reintroduced to many people through a study, a book on neuroscience a few years ago, which I recommend. And it's called The Master and His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. And what this author had done was look at neuroscience, and he asked a question, a very philosophical question. Why is the human brain divided in half? The human brain, as far as we know, is the most complex object in the universe. It's certainly the most complex object we know of in the universe. It's amazing. You're all carrying around something amazing on your shoulders. And of course it extends down to the back and into every part of your body. But why is it divided in half? You've never thought about this? Well, if you want some intellectual fun, I recommend this book. I've been trying to find a pen that works. My search is on. It's called The Master and His Emissary. The Master and His Emissary. And it's really a book about the difference between scientia and the other intellectual virtue. I'll name it for you in Latin. It's called intellectus. Not intelligence, I'm afraid, but obviously connected with the word. Intellectus. And it's normally translated, what other word of English?
Understanding.
Understanding. Is understanding important? I tell you something, my physics professor at Merton College thought it was. This is the materialist, by the way, who said if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. Let me explain what he did. He would explain he would explain an approach to physics, right? And then he'd ask us all a question. There were only 2 or 3 gathered. And he would ask the question, do we understand? And we all said, oh yes, we understand, yes. Yeah, sure. And he would look at our faces, blank. And he knows that he has to work harder. So he goes to another level, a simpler level, still quite high, simple. And he'd ask again, do you understand? And he'd check our faces, still blank. Right? And he'd work down in complexity until, and actually the face changes. In psychology, they call this the eureka moment. And it's incredibly important. And I'm afraid it's very understudied. It's been a bit overlooked in philosophy the last 200 to 300 years, like most other things. But it's incredibly important, and it's at the heart of all our problems with AI. Anyone know the famous 2 thought experiments of AI? The 2 famous thought experiments, yes?
The Chinese room.
Chinese room, yes. Anyone know what the Chinese room is? How it works? Yes.
I think the basic idea is you have someone who sits in an empty room with a chart of Chinese characters, and you have someone else feeding a message in Chinese into the room, and the person uses the chart to decipher the message and reproduce a translation. And the question is, well, can this person speak Chinese?
Exactly, yes. So the man's inside a closed room, He doesn't speak Chinese, doesn't understand Chinese, but he has a code book for translating any input into any output. And he's very good at it, he's very fast. And outside the room, they feed in Chinese questions and they receive back perfect Chinese answers. But as the inventor of this thought experiment says, he puts himself in the room and says, but I don't understand Chinese. And there is, the point is, it highlights a difference between achieving the right answer and understanding. And understanding is this fifth intellectual virtue. Very important. And there's another famous thought experiment in AI research. Anyone know what it's called? You ought to know why someone came up with the Chinese room. Yes.
The Turing test?
The Turing test. And Alan Turing said the opposite. He said, well, if someone gives back the right answers, we are not justified in saying that they're not intelligent. Or a computer that gives the right answers, we're not justified in saying that the computer is not an intelligence. And this is these two thought experiments are still very angrily debated today. So this is where philosophy comes into AI research, very important. So this comes on to a second definition of metaphysics. Metaphysics deals with the stuff at the narrow end of the funnel, not just material reality, but also things like what kind of causes there are, and how many different categories of causation are there. So the study of you could call it first philosophy, the study of the things that come first. But you can also call metaphysics wisdom. And wisdom is a combination of scientia and intellectus applied to the things at the narrow end of the funnel. I didn't mention what scientia is. Scientia is the habit of reasoning well from premises to conclusions. At Oxford we're very good at that, we're very good at reasoning from premises to conclusions. We kind of forget the intellectus bit. Although I give you a counter-example, my physics professor at Merton, who would check our faces. So he knew it wasn't enough to get the right answer. We had to understand. And he worked hard to make sure we understood. That's, by the way, why we have tutorials at Oxford. I don't think you've ever thought about that. Why do we have tutorials? It's not the most... If you want information, you can look at a book. What is the benefit of a tutorial? Why have I chosen not to give you slides today? I've got plenty of slides, I tell you. I thought, when I started to prepare this talk, I thought, I'm bored with slides. And you're probably bored as well. I mean, what is one benefit of what I've been doing? Hopefully. What is the benefit of what I've been doing? Yes?
You can just what you want to focus on by having to respond.
Yes, I'm responding to you, and you're responding to me. And I may be able to trigger something. There is something called an act of understanding. And a famous Jesuit wrote a book about this. It's one word, it's called insight. Insight. And insight is very poorly understood. It may be much more to do with the right hemisphere of the brain, on the account of the mastery. So, a person of wisdom has both the ability to reason well from premises to conclusions, but also the ability to grasp, to understand. And understanding is hard, I promise you it's hard. You could spend, I remember speaking to one of my teachers in Rome who taught to me the Aristotle's Metaphysics. And I remember him saying, now this is after 25 years of study, he said, I've just begun to understand Aristotle on action. This is the teacher. I've just begun to understand. So there are things that take time to understand. And don't be too anxious if you don't get them straight away. So, what is metaphysics, stuff at the narrow end of the funnel, and wisdom in the sense of grasping and reasoning well, especially with the things at the narrow end of the funnel. There is a third word for metaphysics, so I'm just going to finish now. Third word for metaphysics. So, let me ask you a question. I have suggested to you that the path from knowledge to wisdom is a matter of finding an ever smaller number of ever more powerful causes. The general heuristic, it's only heuristic, is a kind of funnel. Now, if you see a funnel, what is the natural next question to ask? Someone said that.
Where's the stop?
Where's the stop? Do you not hunger to know the answer to that question? You should. If you see a funnel like that, you think, when does it come to an end? This is the motivation for all of physics. The hundreds of millions of dollars that we spend on building massive machines, or the James Webb Space Telescope. Did anyone see the launch of the James Webb Space Telescope? Christmas Day. It's worth seeing. We don't yet know it works, but everything's gone well so far. And the NASA director who was there, he shocked everyone. Anyone know why? He gave a speech. He quoted from the Psalms, and he said, I'm reminded of King David looking up and saying, "The heavens proclaim the glory of the Lord." The heavens proclaim the glory of the Lord. Which brings me to my final point. An ever small number of ever more powerful causes. If you could find the end of the funnel, what would its characteristics be?
It would be, you would assume, radically unlike everything we're explaining by reference to it.
It would certainly be unlike, yes. It can't, by the way, it can't be a material thing, because matter is about change.
If it's unique, then it's completely free. Because
So
the
it's
things-
free or so, yes, that's an interesting argument. Well, actually, there are two very simple characteristics, just by the way the problem's set up. Whatever, if there is something that can be denotated at the end of the funnel, causes everything else without itself being caused. Yes? Just by being at the end of the funnel. And what is the name we give to that which causes everything else without itself being caused?
God.
Someone said that.
God.
God, thank you. So there's the third word for metaphysics. Theology. Natural theology. So the three words for metaphysics is first philosophy, it's wisdom, and it's natural theology. Which is one reason it's hated. So why is it important for different subjects? Anyway, there's a lawyer here. Isn't there a lawyer? Yes. What is the philosophy of law? It's a famous, so it's actually a separate subject for the philosophy of law.
It's about natural law.
Do you know what the name is? There's a special name for the philosophy of law. Begins with J in English. Jurisprudence. Jurisprudence. So, law, like every other subject, has a philosophy, which is about the causes of that subject. And it doesn't have to be anything too exotic. I mean, cooking has a philosophy, And in fact, it's very interesting. You can discuss the formation of bread, for example, or wine. These are very complex things, and people study them for years. So you've got a philosophy for everything, a philosophy of law particularly, a philosophy of physics. So why is it important? Because if you want to do well in your disciplines, you'll know the philosophy. You'll be able to grasp something of the philosophy of the discipline. I once used to show my students the CV of a famous American politician called Condoleezza Rice. Have you ever heard of Condoleezza Rice? She was a black woman who was in George Bush's junior cabinet. And I used to share her CV. And she was a concert level pianist. She was on the board of an oil and gas company. She was on the board of a telecommunications company. And I asked my students, how can one person do all these things? And the answer is, if you do philosophy, if you grasp first principles, you can in fact run, to give a modern example, a car company, a space company, and a social media company, perhaps. We'll see how he gets on with that. Okay. Well, I better finish there. So why is philosophy important? Two reasons, at least. One which is natural for us. All human beings by nature desire to know. Children show us this. Why? And that doesn't go away, it's just been buried underneath our other stuff. So I encourage you to get back to being children in the best way in this university. And by the way, don't be afraid to ask questions. I've had students come and just knock at my door and almost demand that I explain quantum mechanics and Thomas Aquinas, for example. And I congratulate them. I say, well, first of all, who are you? That's the first word. But I congratulate them on doing that, because most of the teachers in this university love talking about the subject. And you can ask them questions, open questions, and they'll talk and talk, right? And you can learn a lot when you talk, when you listen. So I encourage you to be philosophers for your own sakes and to flourish in your disciplines. And I better say one more little thing. There is something which separates us from the ancient Greeks. Very important, separates us from the ancient Greeks. Anyone know what I'm talking about? Anyone know what particular thing I, as a Catholic priest, might be talking about? Yes?
Divine revelation.
Yeah, or how about the incarnation, right? And this changes metaphysics just a little bit. Quite a lot. It introduces one principle that's not in the Greek philosophy. One principle that's really not in the Greek philosophy. Anyone know what that principle is? I'll tell you, it's the person. The Greeks and the Romans didn't really have a concept of person. They learned it in the late Roman Empire to express Christian theology. But the person and the second person relationship, the I-thou relationship, is really highlighted in Judaism and Christianity. So there's a whole, metaphysics is not just the ancient Greeks. They gave us metaphysical biology, but also the metaphysics of persons, and that's a supernatural theology. Okay, I've done. I'm happy to discuss things further.
Now we can open the floor to some
Yes.
questions. If there are.
Please disagree if you like. Yes, sir.
This is more of a scientific question, but
Yes.
it's related because obviously these questions are all related. Usually when I speak to physicists, I always ask them to define energy. Can you define energy?
I do. Could I define energy? I'd have to use a basic physics definition. It was the ability to do work, I think.
Okay.
I'm afraid. So something that's measurable. The ability to do work, which is also a physical quantity in this case. I'm cautious of the word energy because it's misused quite a lot. And it's often used in a kind of pseudo-religious way as well, in a weird way. So I tend to steer away from it. So I'm afraid I've neglected it a bit. If you want me to define something else, matter, that's interesting. I think it's the ability to, it's what makes change possible. Yes.
Is there a possibility in identifying or seeing some level of connection between what modern physics looks at as energy and what, for example, Aristotle would look at as first matter?
The trouble is we're dealing with a different world. And modern physics is very much gave rise to modern philosophy. And what gave rise to modern physics was really idealized thought and study of two-body systems. And it took me a long time to realise this. That what modern physics studies almost exclusively are two-body systems, or systems of many parts which can be treated statistically. Modern physics is not very good at all the in-between systems. And that's a shame, because when we get three-body systems, we actually get something really shocking, which is the re-emergence of end-directed action. Has anyone heard of chaos theory? Maybe a few nods here. Find someone who does know about it and demand an explanation. Okay. So, chaos theory is the study of really greater than two-body systems. And what we've been able to do in recent years is to at least simulate them approximately. We can't solve them, and we can't solve them perfectly mathematically, which is interesting in itself, but we can simulate them. And we discover something really amazing, which Aristotle would have recognized, which is teleology, because these systems can evolve towards final forms. And so it's a reverse of what we have expected. We have spent the last 4 centuries treating the biological world like big machines, living things like big machines. We discovered it's the opposite. Biological type behavior appears in very simple systems, like a snowflake. A snowflake develops towards a final form, which is always symmetrical, and always, I think, beautiful, and always different. So there's wisdom in snowflakes.
Sorry, could you explain what you mean by two-body systems and three-body systems?
Okay, let me give you an example from physics. So the Earth and the Moon, that would be a two-body system. Here's another two-body system, the Earth and the Sun.
Okay.
That's a two-body system. And something about two-body systems is nothing ever happens. So one goes around, well, they both go around each other. If you reverse time and reverse space, you end up with the same pattern. And modern philosophy has been very much shaped by this kind of thinking, modeling the world in a machine-like way. This is a machine-like action. What most people don't know is that Newton could not solve his equations for a three-body system. So a three-body system will be something like the Sun, the Earth, and the Moon. Now, it doesn't mean we've got chaos. We can approximate that system as two-body systems put together. We can approximate, but that's not quite right. And we discover lots of strange actions when you get three-body systems. So back in the 1960s, there was an American student, I think his name was Gary Flandro, I think. And he borrowed time on his university computer in California. This cost like $1,000 an hour, you know. But he sneaked in, or borrowed or begged for time on his university computer. And he used this to approximate a particular three-body problem. So, how does a spacecraft move that's moving past a planet, which is itself moving? And one thing he discovered was that he could accelerate the space probe. And that made modern astronomy of the solar system possible, because he discovered he could take a spacecraft past Jupiter and accelerate it. And people also realized in 1978, 4 planets would line up: Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And a single spacecraft could visit all 4. And that wasn't going to happen again for another 180 years. So NASA launched a crash program to get 2 spacecraft across the whole of the outer solar system. And this is an example of three-body mechanics. That's changed astronomy today? Yes.
I have a really vast question. I'm thinking about Chesterton, who says that we should always wonder that the sun rises in the morning and sets at night.
Yes.
Because God wills it, not because the laws of physics.
Right.
And so what do we make? Well, what do you make as a theologian and a scientist of the sun rising in the morning?
Well, both explanations are compatible. So, if I ask another question, let's take a question: why does a kettle boil? Anyone like to give me some reasons why a kettle boils? Yes.
Because you flip the switch.
Because you flick the switch and electric current flows through and heats up the element and boils the water. Yes, very good. Any other reasons?
If it was your intention to flick the switch.
Why? Okay. Why might I want to boil a kettle? To make tea or something. Whatever. So, to give a reason for something is not to say there are no other reasons. And that's one of the reasons why the study of causes is important, because we realise that things often have more than one cause. Anyone know the names of the four causes now, Aristotle? Yes.
Formal, material, efficient, final.
Formal, efficient, material, and final. A lot of Catholic theology, those who are Catholics, yeah. If you're not, well, pursue it. A lot of Catholic theology uses the four causes to analyse things like the sacraments, for example. So it's part of the toolkit of theology over the last 1,000 years. So there often are more than one cause. There's often more than one cause for things. The answer because can have more than one answer validly. Yes.
Sorry. What would you recommend to somebody like me who studies classics to understand more about sort of scientific theories and stuff like that? Because I've often thought sometimes perhaps the best way is to get an understanding of the history of the discovery of things, but equally, other times I often think are there things that happen at the university? Because usually most of the scientific stuff that happens in university is aimed for people who already know quite a bit about science.
I sympathise with the problem. It's not easy. How do you get started? And the problem is reading standard histories is often not helpful, because I had an example of this when I went to the Royal Society in London. I looked at the shelves. I was shocked. It's wacko stuff. What you've got is Victorian gentlemen often meeting together to discuss completely bonkers theories, or making thousands of measurements that don't mean anything. Like there's one chap used to wander and measure the air temperature every day for 40 years or something. Or come up with weird theories, like almost like scientism, or not scientism, Scientology or something. You see, what we get in our textbooks is the sanitized account of science, purged of all the weird stuff.
Yes.
So, force at a distance, the Earth and the Moon. How does the Earth and Moon attract? Well, we just describe it. We don't actually explain it. So, how do you learn about the good? Well, you've got to ask. Best thing, ask for advice. I could recommend a couple of books. On the subject of artificial intelligence, which is quite a good way to get into sciencey bits of philosophy. There's a book called What Computers Still Can't Do by Herbert Dreyfus. Anyone ever see the film RoboCop? Anyone want to admit to seeing the film RoboCop? Okay, John.
I've seen it.
Thank you, Bob. Okay, so the film RoboCop, early on, there's a Senator Dreyfus. There's a figure sometime early in one of the versions of RoboCop, I don't know. But I know where they're getting it from. They're getting it from this book, because Herbert Dreyfus was a critic of artificial intelligence. So that's one book. I'd recommend the book The Master and His Emissary. That's by a philosopher at Oxford who asked an unpopular question. Why is the human brain divided in half? We've got the most complex known objects in the universe on our shoulders. Why is it divided almost completely in half? And the communicating bits, in part, impede communication between the hemispheres. And the conclusion he came to was that we need different takes on the world. And it's to some extent linked to those two intellectual virtues at the bottom of the list. Scientia, the ability to reason well from premises to conclusions, and intellectus, which he understands understanding. So that's a great book. The Master of His Emissary, The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World. And it covers art, sacraments, all kinds of stuff along the way. So you get a lot of other stuff. You get many university courses in that one book. In the area of philosophical theology, I would recommend my former supervisor, a woman called Eleanor Stump. Eleanor Stump. And she wrote, she's got plenty of books in our libraries. Wandering in Darkness. She wrote a book simply called Aquinas. So you could just pick that book out and find a chapter and work your way through it. And the other thing about philosophy is that there are few good communicators of philosophy. And someone mentioned Chesterton. Remember Chesterton? Chesterton, thank you. G.K. Chesterton is brilliant. And you should read G.K. Chesterton on Aquinas. And he didn't really study Aquinas, but he sort of just grasped it and wrote down this very simple account. And many professional philosophers say, we couldn't do this, you know. So G.K. Chesterton, for example, Chesterton on Aquinas, but also Chesterton, there's a book called The Everlasting Man. There's a book called Orthodoxy. Are you Catholic?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, you should read Orthodoxy. And he says what's interesting is people today boast about being heretics. And Chesterton says, no, Orthodoxy is the wild, crazy thing. The heretics are boring, that's why they die, the heretics die. You know? So Chesterton is an extraordinary amateur philosopher. And he pokes fun at professional philosophers in a good way. He pokes fun at a priest at one point who's trying to say something complimentary about Hegel, a famous philosopher Hegel, and he says, yes, but this good priest is missing the main point, which is that Hegel was mad, right? Okay, you know, be careful. The world of philosophy is a bit dangerous as well. There are dangerous beasts in the forest. I mentioned Hegel. Anyone know what Hegel inspired in the 20th century?
Nazism.
Well, I've really made mania of communism, actually. Communism, maybe 1/6 of the world's population, or maybe even less, about 1/3 at the height of its power. 1/3 of the people lived in the 20th century, at certain points in the 20th century, were living under communism. Which reminds me of something else I must just briefly tell you. So where do these words come from? I'm going to just give you some words. I want you to tell me where they come from. All flowers of the earth sing of his love. He is the creator of happiness. I'll just repeat those words. All flowers of the earth tell of his love. He is the creator of happiness.
Now, very good.
So you nearly got it. This is a patriotic song from North Korea. The last line is long live General Kim Jong-il. And we can laugh, and we should laugh. But you can't laugh in North Korea. You and your parents and your grandparents and all your children, if you've got children, will be taken to a concentration camp just for disrespecting the ruling family. It's, I ask people, you see, this pattern of an ever small number of ever more powerful causes is universal for human beings. There has to be something into the funnel. The issue, gentlemen, is not whether God exists, it's what God is. And all the communist governments of the last 100 years, all of them produced a supreme leader who was omnipotent, omniscient, and as nearly immortal as technology could make him. And even now, the wretched man in North Korea can still destroy the world. He's trying to do it. He's trying to threaten to do it. I remember talking to these rather weak Catholics in Australia. I said, you're a missile range of this guy, wake up, there's a battle on in the world of ideas. Got any other questions? Challenges? Yes, sir.
Do ideas exist?
I think so. But I'd love to debate it further. It's not an easy question. Please be liberated from simple materialism. So here's a question for all of you: to be or not to be? That's from Hamlet. To be or not to be? Are those the only options? That could be the starting point of a whole course, but Aristotle would disagree in a sense. He'd say there are many ways in which a thing is said to be. The being of a colour or the being of an action is different to the being of a living thing. And ideas are things that human beings have, at least. There's no reason why we can't say that they are. We can certainly talk about them as if they are. There are many ways in which a thing is said to be. Unfortunately, 20th century is is logical in a bad way. It's binary logic. Yes or no, binary logic, true or false. But there are ways in which a thing can be true, but not all those ways are commensurate with one another. Has this been any use to you?
Yeah.
Maybe that's the wrong question. Have you enjoyed it? Thanks for interacting. Thanks for playing. Thanks for coming along.